cluster of what I would describe as celebrities, and I'm not going to dwell on those either. So, just some statistics for you. You could probably do a sociology PhD to analyse why the readers voted the way they did. And the astute of you might have noticed that the total adds up to 105 rather than 100. That will be explained in due course. But interestingly, there are at least 27 people that I would consider to be figures of historical importance. Just to look at the gender. Speaks volumes about women's traditional place in society, and why, you might ask, is one neither a man nor a woman. All will be revealed in due course. So there's lots of people to look at. I haven't got a lot of time, so don't blink, and we'll get on with it. So we've got off to a good start. Joe McKeldry, who's from South Shields, and he won the X Factor in 2009, and he's ranked at 100th place. Harry Nagelstein, I didn't know about this guy. He was born in Poland, and he is an Auschwitz survivor. He was reunited with his sister Mania only in 1982, and he had believed that Mania had died during the Holocaust. Robson Green, born in Hexham, he's an actor, celebrity, singer and extreme fisher. I think Robson Green is a bit like Marmite, you either love him or you hate him. Denise Welsh, she's an actress who has battled with drugs, alcohol and depression and is now in recovery. I think I'm on safe ground by saying, without risk of offending Denise, that she is a loose woman. Tony Scott, he was a Hollywood director, and he directed Top Gun, which launched the acting career of Tom Cruise. Tony committed suicide in 2012 by jumping off the Vincent Thomas Bridge in California. That was subsequent to him receiving a very bad diagnosis. Ross Noble, he is a dyslexic comedian, originally from Cramlington. He has lived in Australia until his home was destroyed by a bushfire, and he has returned to England. Dame Flora Robson, she was a classical and Hollywood actress, born in South Shields. She had a theatre named after her, which was situated on Benton Bank in Newcastle. That theatre was demolished in 1971. Flora never married. She once said that she would have traded some of her acting talent for just a bit of beauty. Albert Stubbins, he's the first of the footballers. He was born in Wallsend and was a prolific goal scorer who played for both Newcastle United and Liverpool. Sid Waddell, he was the son of a miner raised in Linemouth. He went to Oxford and remarkably ended up as a darts commentator. Sid was known for his historical and classical references. For example, he said when Alexander of Macedonia was 33, he cried salt tears because there were no more worlds to conquer. Eric Bristow is only 27. Mike Neville. Mike Neville, the television presenter who worked mainly on regional news programmes in the northeast of England with both the BBC and Tyne Tees. He was recently given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Royal Television Society. Mike lived just round the corner from where I live in Wickham, and my claim to fame is that I've spoken twice on the telephone to Mike Neville. The first was when I was asked by his wife, Pam, who was the director at Wickham Theatre Club, to be Buttons in Cinderella, and I was unsure given that I was 47 at the time playing Buttons. So I rang up Pam and Mike took the call and I said, I'm not sure that I can do it. And he said, okay, I'll just pass on the message to Pam. Then I went home and spoke to my wife and said, don't be silly. you're never too old to play buttons. So I ran back again and said, Mike, I've changed my mind. I will be buttons after all. And he said, well, I'll tell Pam she's in here. And he put the phone down and he shouted, Pam, Buttons said he will go to the ball after all. Esther McCracken. She was educated at Newcastle Central High. She was a playwright, actress and broadcaster. She wrote Quiet Wedding in 1938, which made her reputation as a writer of comedy. That play ran for over 1,000 performances in London. She would also write Quiet Weekend in 1945. Andrea Wonfor. She was born in Margate and brought up in Kent. She became a TV executive with Time Teas and was the driving force behind the programmes The Tube and Biker Grove. She died of breast cancer in 2004. Brian Robson, nicknamed Captain Marvel. He came from Chesterley Street and was a very successful footballer for Manchester United. The longest serving captain in the club's history. He won 90 caps for England. Stan Laurel. He was born in Ulverston. He understudied Charlie Chaplin for a time, and with his partner Oliver Hardy, Stan made 107 films. He lived for a time in Dockwray Square in North Shields. He was married 5 times, twice to the same woman. David Ormond. He was born in Newcastle and raised in Felling, and he is regarded as one of the country's most exciting children's authors. He wrote Skellig in 1998. This is a face that you may not recognise. Lee Hall, a Cambridge graduate. Lee is a playwright, and 2 of his works have become smash hits on Broadway. Billy Elliot and The Pitman Painters. He also claims the writing credits for Steven Spielberg's film War Horse. So I think that should be renamed War Horse. I hadn't heard of this lady before, Mary Hagan. She is a singer and was nicknamed the Nightingale of the North. She made her debut as a child at the Gaiety Theatre in Nelson Street in Newcastle during the 1930s. And apparently she melted the hearts of everyone who heard her. And she once topped the bill at the Royal Albert Hall. She had 18 hits in total. Graham Danby, born in Concert. He was educated at the Royal Academy of Music, and he is now a world-famous opera singer and has performed at some of the greatest venues in the world. He's what is known as a basso profundo, a deep bass. James Bolam, born in Sunderland, trained as a chartered accountant, before becoming an actor. He might have learnt new tricks of late, but James Bolam will forever be remembered as Terry Collier in The Likely Lads. And while we're on the subject of The Likely Lads, he's not on the list, but I had to mention him. Rodney Bewes, the honorary Geordie. He died on the 21st of November of this year. So Les Ferdinand, known affectionately as Sir Les, Les Ferdinand formed a formidable strike partnership with Alan Shearer at Newcastle United. Kevin Whately is another person who originally trained as an accountant. He became an actor and he made his name in the TV series Auf Wiedersehen, Pet. But perhaps his most famous role is the down-to-earth Detective Sergeant Lewis, colleague and friend of Inspector Morse. Catherine Tickell. She was born in Walsall but brought up in Northumberland, and Catherine is an acclaimed musician. She plays the Northumbrian small pipes and fiddle. Stephen Miller. Stephen was born with cerebral palsy. He attended the wonderful Percy Headley School for a time, and he captained the men's squad for Great Britain at the 2012 Summer Paralympics. Tim Healy, born in Benwell. Tim made his name as the Geordie Bricky Dennis in Auf Wiedersehen Pet. Tim was amongst the founder members in 1973 of Newcastle's Live Theatre. Neil Tennant of the Pet Shop Boys, he went to St Cuthbert's Grammar School, he was actually in my year, and he is part of the most successful duo in UK music history, the Pet Shop Boys, and they have sold more than 100 million records worldwide. Alan Armstrong, he made his acting breakthrough in Get Carter, and he is now one of the country's most respected character actors, and he is an accomplished Shakespearean too. He was born in Anfield Plain. There is now an Alan Armstrong Theatre in Stanley. Ian Lafreniere. Ian was born in Monkseaton, and with his writing partner Dick Clement, they have created the series The Likely Lads, Porridge, and Auf Wiedersehen Pet. Jonathan Edwards. He was born in Westminster in London. He was a triple jumper and a former Olympic and world champion. He still holds the world record for the triple jump, which is 60 foot. He worked on songs of praise in retirement before renouncing his faith. Terry Deary. He was born in Sunderland, and he is a children's author of over 200 books, best known as the writer of the Horrible History series. He was formerly a teacher who taught drama, and he is a great critic of schools and also public libraries. For example, he thinks children should leave school aged 11. Charles Avison. Charles Avison single-handedly made Newcastle England's greatest provincial music centre of the 18th century. Arguably the 18th century greatest concerto composer, and his essay on musical expression, written in 1752, is the first treatise of musical criticism that had been written in English. The wonderful Gertrude Bell, adventurer, archaeologist, cartographer, historian, linguist, mountaineer, traveller, writer, not to mention being a World War I intelligence officer. She played a major role in the creation of the modern Middle East. A true polymath. And another great person, Thomas Bewick. Outstandingly gifted, he revolutionised wood engraving and galvanised an interest in the study of natural history. Thomas would become internationally famous during his own lifetime. Charlie Spedding. He was born in Bishop Auckland. He won the Olympic bronze in the marathon in 1984, and that was the first Olympic medal in the marathon that Great Britain had won in 20 years. We have won no further medals in the men's marathon since 1984. Cheryl Cole, from Newcastle, a singer, dancer, model and X Factor judge. She is a consummate celebrity, but she still finds time for charitable work, particularly for Comic Relief and the Prince's Trust. Bob Stokoe. He won the FA Cup as a player in 1955 with Newcastle United, and also won it in 1973 as manager of Sunderland. Harry Shukla, a pioneer in bridge building between ethnic communities. He arrived in Newcastle from his native Uganda in 1973 and was given the freedom of the city of Newcastle, the first person from an ethnic minority to have received that particular honour. A relation of ours, Rowan Atkinson, comedic actor, best known for Mr. Bean and Blackadder. He studied electrical engineering at Newcastle University before going on to Oxford to do an MSc at Queen's College. Rowan has a stammer which makes him reluctant to give interviews. William Shield. Did William Shield write the music to Old Lang Syne? He did study music with Charles Avison, and in 1817 William was appointed Master of the King's Music to George III. He's principally known for his light English opera Rosina, composed in 1781. He is buried in Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey. Not bad for a lad from Swallow. T. Dan Smith. Dubbed Mr. Newcastle. T. Dan was originally from Wallsend and became leader of Newcastle City Council in the mid-1960s. He was a charismatic and dynamic person. He was jailed for 6 years on charges of corruption. He never ever admitted his guilt to those charges, and when he was released from prison, spent his time on charity work and community projects. Mike MacLeod, he was an Elsa carrier, the first winner of the Great North Run in 1981. He won the Morpeth to Newcastle road race 5 times and the Saltwell Harriers 10k road race 16 years in a row. This is the one that's not a man or a woman, it's a comic, Viz. First published in 1979, this comic became a million-selling phenomenon after Virgin started publishing Viz nationwide. It was created by Chris and Simon Donald, and it specialises in schoolboy toilet humour. Not my choice. If you're going to pick a cartoon, I'd rather the readers had voted for Andy Cap. Peter Beardsley. He played for Newcastle, Liverpool and England, and is now a coach at Newcastle United. Sir Thomas Allen, he was born in Seaham and is a baritone singer. He's a world-famous opera star whose story apparently inspired Billy Elliot, according to its writer Lee Hall. Sir Thomas is currently Chancellor of Durham University. Sir Ridley Scott, from South Shields, currently one of Hollywood's top directors. His movies include Blade Runner, Alien, and the marvellous Gladiator. He is currently tasked with airbrushing Kevin Spacey out of the movie All the Money in the World. Josephine Butler, she was born in Millfield in Northumberland. She was a member of the famous Grey family from Northumberland, and she in her time was described as one of the great people of the world. She worked with Liverpool's prostitutes during the 1860s and led a campaign to repeal what was known as the Contagious Diseases Act, which gave magistrates the power to order examination and detention of infected women and put them away in luck hospitals for up to 3 months. Juxtapose her with the next person, Paul Gascoigne. Paul Gazza has been described as the most naturally gifted English midfielder of his generation. Tragically, his private life has been dominated by problems principally to do with alcohol. Cardinal Basil Hume. He was the son of a Protestant heart surgeon and a French Catholic mother. He was educated at Ampleforth and Oxford. He joined the Benedictine order in 1941 and in 1963 became Abbot of Ampleforth, and in 1976 became Cardinal of the English Church. He was apparently a very humble and caring man. He became Freeman of Newcastle in 1980, and that was the same day that Jackie Milburn was made Freeman of Newcastle, and apparently they were both tongue-tied because they were in the company of their respective hero. John Clayton. John Clayton was the Newcastle town clerk from 1822. Richard Granger employed John Clayton as his advocate and advisor to help get his bold development plan of Newcastle past the town council in 1834. John Clayton, in his spare time, preserved the central stretch of Hadrian's Wall. Shola Amiobi, he was born in Nigeria, played almost 400 times for Newcastle, scoring 79 goals. His father is a pastor in the Pentecostal church, and Shola himself has very strong religious beliefs. Brian Ferry, he came from Washington. He is a singer-songwriter, especially with Roxy music, and he's also known for his sartorial elegance. So that's the first 50 we're rattling through, aren't we? Alan Plater, he was born in Jarrow. He was a writer for stage, screen and radio, and his work rejoiced in the lives of ordinary people in everyday settings. Z-Cars and its sequel, Softly, Softly, were down to Alan Plater. He also wrote Close the Coal House Door. Norman Cornish, he is perhaps the most celebrated of the Pitman painters. He began working down the mines aged 14. He soon afterwards joined the Spennymoor Sketch Club. In total, Norman spent a total of 33 years working underground. Glenn McCrory, he was born in Anfield Plain and was the region's first ever world boxing champion. He won the World Cruiserweight title in 1989. He won 30 out of his 39 fights in his career and is now apparently a commentator working for Sky TV. Timothy Hackworth, he was born in Wylam and with his partner William Headley built the Puffing Billy and Wylam Dilly, two early railway locomotives which inspired George Stephenson. In 1833, Timothy set up his own locomotive building company in Shildon. Brian Johnson, born in Dunstan, he is a singer-songwriter and sang with the rock bands Geordies and AC/DC. He was forced to retire in 2016 due to severe hearing problems. Malcolm MacDonald, born in Fulham, London. He scored a hat-trick on his debut for Newcastle against the mighty Liverpool. Thereafter he was referred to as Supermac. He scored 260 goals during his career and scored all 5 goals for England when they beat Cyprus 5-0 in 1976. And I know about that because I was there. Sid Chaplin, he was born in Shildon. He was a former colliery blacksmith. He became a writer and wrote 7 novels and 4 books of short stories. And apparently his short stories inspired the writing of Close the Coal House Door. Sid would go on to write When the Boat Comes In, and Sid was a co-founder of Northern Arts. Steve Cram, one of the world's greatest ever middle distance runners. Steve is now a very respected athletics commentator. Alex Glasgow, a singer-songwriter. His version of Dance to the Daddy featured on When the Boat Comes In. He collaborated with Alan Plater and Sid Chaplin to make Close the Coal House Door. Jack Charlton won the World Cup in 1966. Jack is now suffering with severe memory loss. There is recent evidence that repeated heading of a football might cause brain damage, and it may well be that Jack Charlton is one of football's victims in that regard. Fittingly, he's next to his brother, Bobby Charlton. Bobby survived the Munich air disaster of 1958. He won the World Cup with his brother Jack in 1966. In 1968, he won the European Cup, scoring 2 goals in the final of that competition. Thomas Hepburn. the legendary miners' leader. His father had been killed in a mining accident. In 1830, Thomas helped set up the Northern Union of Pitmen, and after a bitter strike in 1832, that union collapsed, and he was banned from the coalfield. He was eventually re-employed at Felling Colliery, but only after promising not ever to take part in union activity. This is why the total doesn't add up to 100. There are 5 members of the Animals. And the 60s rock band had the deep-voiced frontman Eric Burden. And their signature tune is The House of the Rising Sun. Well done. St. Cuthbert. He was born near Melrose of lowly parents. He entered the monastery there and in 664 became prior of Melrose. He went on to become the Bishop of Lindisfarne, Holy Island, in 685. He died in 687, and his relics were buried initially in Chesterley Street in 883. Then they were moved in 1104 to Durham Cathedral. Joseph Cowen. He was a radical member of Parliament. He was also a journalist and a nationalist. He built the Tyne Theatre and Opera House on Westgate Road and helped form, amongst other things, the first modern cooperative in the northeast of England, which was opened in Blaydon. William Headley, he was born in Newburn, and with his partner he built the steam locomotives, the Puffing Billy and the Wylam Dilly. Harry Clasper. Harry was the Alan Shearer of his day. He was a multiple world champion rower, and his original designs for racing craft are apparently still used today. 130,000 people turned out for his funeral procession. Sometimes think he deserves a higher ranking in this listing. Geordie Ridley. He lived in Gateshead and was severely injured whilst working as a wagon rider for Hawkes Crochet, a Gateshead-based firm. Then he embarked on a short 5-year performing career, singing the Blaydon Races for the first time at a testimonial for Harry Clasper in 1862. Other songs included Cushy Butterfield. Eric Burden is Geordie Ridley's great-great-nephew. The first true hero in this list, Richard Annan VC, was born in South Shields. He won the Victoria Cross with the 2nd Battalion Durham Light Infantry in Belgium during World War II. Although severely wounded, he rejoined the battle to rescue his severely wounded colleague, and he put his wounded colleague in a wheelbarrow and took him off the field of battle. From then on, Richard Annan was referred to as the Wheelbarrow VC. Charles Earl Grey. He had a 50-year political career, the first Prime Minister from the northeast of England. He was the Whig Prime Minister from 1830 to 1834, and he passed what was known as the Great Reform Act of 1832. He had a very interesting private life, a number of witnesses, and a film has been made of his love life. Mark Knopfler. He is the son of a Jewish architect who was forced to flee the fascist regime in Hungary. Mark went on to form the group Dire Straits, whose biggest hit was the album Brothers in Arms, which sold more than 30 million copies. Bob Moncur. He was the last Newcastle captain to ever lift silverware. That was back in 1969 when Newcastle won the Intercities Fairs Cup. That's almost 50 years ago. Alan Hull, he was a former psychiatric nurse. Alan was a singer-songwriter and frontman with the group Lindisfarne, who had significant hits with Lady Eleanor and Fog on the Tyne. Sir Joseph Swan, he was born in Sunderland. He invented the incandescent electric bulb, and he worked in Mosley Street. And fittingly, Mosley Street was the first street in the entire world to be lit with Swan's electric bulbs. Who is greater than this man? Lord Collingwood. At Trafalgar, Admiral Lord Collingwood not only fired the first shot, but also led the British fleet to victory after Nelson's death during that battle. He lived for 61 years. 44 years of his life were spent at sea. Hughie Gallagher, arguably Newcastle's best ever centre forward. He scored 143 times in 174 league and cup appearances, a strike rate of 82%. He was only 5 feet 5 inches tall. Tragically, Hughie Gallagher committed suicide aged 54 by throwing himself under the wheels of an express train in Lowfell, after having been accused of assault, ill treatment and neglect towards his youngest son, Matthew. The Venerable Bede, arguably the greatest Western scholar of his time. Bede is an old Saxon word for prayer. He became a priest aged 30 and was based in Jarrow. He wrote about 50 books. His best known work is the ecclesiastical history of the English-speaking peoples. Sting, he was born Gordon Matthew Sumner in Wallsend, North Tyneside. His father was a milkman and an engineer, and his mother was a hairdresser but a classically trained pianist too. He attended St Cuthbert's Grammar School and has become a musician, singer and songwriter. He is worth an absolute fortune, in excess of £200 million. Bobby Thompson, the little waster. He was born in, he would say, Penshire. Nicknamed the Little Waster because he was short in stature, 5 feet 3 inches tall, and 9 stone in weight, soaking wet. One of his prayers was, "The dole is my shepherd, I shall not work." Charles Parsons, he was apprenticed with Sir William Armstrong in Elsick, and in 1884 he became junior partner at Clark Chapman's in Gateshead. He developed a steam turbine to drive a dynamo to generate electricity, and in 1889 he founded C.A. Parsons at Heaton to produce turbo generators, and those turbo generators powered the Turbinia and then the Mauritania, who were respectively the fastest vessels in the world. Joe Harvey, he skippered Newcastle to consecutive FA Cup wins in 1951 and 1952 during his playing days, and was the last Newcastle United manager to win silverware. That was in 1969. And in deck, Anthony McPartlin and Declan Donnelly, both born in 1975, are the most popular and successful presenters on TV currently. They have been compared with Morecambe and Wise. Emily Wilding Davison, She moved to Longhorsley as a teenager. Her mother ran a bakery there. She went on to Oxford and after university became a suffragette. She infamously stepped in front of King George V's horse at the 1913 Derby and was fatally injured. She's laid to rest at St Mary's in Morpeth. The jockey of the King's horse was a Herbert Jones, and Herbert apparently was haunted by that incident right throughout his life, and Herbert Jones gassed himself to death in 1951. Kevin Keegan, an adopted Geordie, played for Newcastle and managed Newcastle. An outstanding character. Sir John Hall, his fortune was based on two major projects, the building of the Gateshead Metro Centre and the development of Newcastle United. By profession he was a mine surveyor and he sold his stake in Cameron Hall Developments, who had built the Metro Centre. He sold his stake for £70 million in 1991. He was subsequently knighted. Stan Seymour, he was the first person in English football history to win the FA Cup trophy, both as a manager and a player. He was a member of the last Newcastle United team to win the title of the top division, which was as far back as 1926-27, 90 years ago. He won the FA Cup in 1951 and 1952 as manager. Robert Stevenson, he was a railway and civil engineer. His London to Birmingham line, built in 1865, was seen by Victorians as being on a par with the building of the pyramids. The Victoria Bridge, which he built in Montreal, Canada, was described in its time as being the eighth wonder of the world. He was the brains behind the building of the locomotive, the Rocket. And his bridges include our own high-level bridge over the Tyne and the Royal Border Bridge at Berwick. A true genius. Ellen Wilkinson, the subject of one of my new talks, MP for Jarrow from 1935. Less than 5 feet tall, she was nicknamed Red Ellen, and she organised the Jarrow March in October of 1936. In 1945, she was appointed Minister of Education, the first woman ever to hold that post. Tragically, Ellen would take a fatal overdose, aged 55. John Dobson, arguably the best architect to have come from our area. He was prolific, producing more than 400 buildings of all sizes. His greatest public building was the Central Station, opened in 1850. He was also a very accomplished watercolour artist too. Brendan Foster, he won the bronze in the 10,000 metres at the 1976 Montreal Olympics. He was a very successful commentator for the BBC and also a very successful entrepreneur. Brendan truly put the North East on the world map with his Great North Run, and he was the brains behind that. We're now entering the top 10, you'll be pleased to know. Lord Armstrong. He changed career to become inventor, engineer, scientist and businessman. He was one of the most influential men in Europe. But should he be seen as a national hero or a merchant of death? A great philanthropist or an uncaring employer? George Stephenson, the father of the railways, one of the greatest ever Britons. George Stephenson literally changed the world. He built the first public railway in the world to employ steam locomotives. That was the Stockton and Darlington line. And he built the first public intercity railway line. That was the Liverpool to Manchester line. He was also the inventor of a number of things, including the Geordie safety lamp. Richard Granger, he was the visionary who helped make modern Newcastle. He drew up a plan to redesign Newcastle's town centre, which was supported by the town clerk, John Clayton. Richard Granger completed the first major rebuilding of a major town centre in the whole of England. Another true hero, Grace Darling. In September the 7th, 1838, Grace and her father, William, rescued 9 people near the Farne Islands in Northumberland. She subsequently turned down all offers, financial and otherwise, to acknowledge her courage. She continued to live at home with her parents, but tragically died aged just 26 years old of consumption. Adam Wakenshaw, BC. He was with the 9th Battalion of the Durham Light Infantry in Egypt in 1942 when he had his left arm blown off. Despite that, he dragged himself back to his 20-pounder gun twice to give his other comrades time to escape. He was awarded the Victoria Cross posthumously. There is a stained glass window in St Mary's Roman Catholic Cathedral in Newcastle in his honour, and there is a Wakenshaw junction in the centre of Newcastle near to where he lived, which was Duke Street in Newcastle. Alan Shearer. Alan Shearer scored a hat-trick when he played for Southampton on his full league debut, aged 17. He joined Newcastle in what was then a world record transfer fee for £15 million. He was certainly worth the season ticket money when I watched Newcastle. In retirement, he is a TV pundit and a tireless worker for a number of charities. Alan Shearer unquestionably was a great footballer. But was he greater than the next man I'm going to tell you about? I didn't know very much about this man. Colin Veitch is arguably the most successful Newcastle captain ever. He won the top title division 3 times. That was in 1905, 1907 and 1909. He also won the FA Cup in 1910. But he wasn't just a footballer. Colin Veitch was a respected playwright. He was also an actor. He was a composer and a conductor. He sang the opera. And he was one of the founding members of the People's Theatre in Newcastle. He also went on to establish the Professional Footballers Association, the Footballers Union. A truly remarkable man. And talking about remarkable people, Dame Catherine Cookson. She sold more than 120 million books. Catherine was the illegitimate child of an alcoholic mother. She left school aged 13 and obtained a job in a laundry in a workhouse. In 1929, she moved to Kent. There she met her husband, who was a teacher. She ran a laundry in Kent. When they got married, Catherine had 4 miscarriages before it was discovered that she was suffering from a rare disease, which was called telangiectasia. That caused Catherine the realization to have a mental breakdown. And writing proved to be a great therapy for her, and her first novel, Kate Hannigan, was published in 1950. In total, she would write 96 books, 76 of which were set in the northeast of England. When she passed away, her husband Tom passed away 2.5 weeks after her. Sir Bobby Robson. He was born in Sacriston. He won 20 caps for England. He became manager of England in 1982 and was manager until 1990. He won titles as a club manager in Holland, Portugal and Spain before becoming Newcastle United's manager. The Sir Bobby Robson Foundation has raised many millions of pounds for cancer research. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking for 45 minutes. So who do you think is number one? Anybody would like to suggest who you think might be voted the top of the 100 Geordies?
My husband.
Well done, yes. Good choice.
Capability Brown.
Capability Brown, it's a very good suggestion. Very good suggestion. Anybody? Anything else?
Graham Wiley.
Graham Wiley, that's certainly a modern one, yeah.
Johnny Wilkinson. Oh, yes.
Johnny Wilkinson. Well, I'll put you out your misery.
Go on then.
You were
Jackie Milburn, who signed for Newcastle in 1943, signed as a professional footballer but continued with his job as a colliery fitter. He won the FA Cup 3 times in the 1950s, scoring twice in the 1951 final, and in 1955 scored what was then the quickest FA Cup final goal ever. He scored 10 goals in 13 games for England. He was a very modest man and a consummate gentleman off the pitch. So that's your top 100. And interestingly, just like to show you some people who weren't voted onto the top 100 list. Capability Brown is one of these people. And there are a number of others. And there is no place either for another subject of one of my new talks, and that was Ada Lovelace. So that's a blatant plug for my new talk. She had a very interesting life. Anyway, that's your top 100 Geordies. I hope you've enjoyed the story. Thanks very much for your
Any questions? You've just given us so much detail there. It's hard to think of any questions. No questions? Okay, Marcus.
Well, Anthony, thank you very, very much. I'm not a Geordie, as you can probably realise, but I've lived up here since 1956. I'm nearly a Geordie.
yes.
And how you've gathered all these facts and given us such an interesting talk, I can't imagine the work you've done.
Labour of love.
But I remember watching Jackie Milburn, your number one, play at Fratton Park at Portsmouth when I was just a boy.
Yes.
Just the other day.
And he was really good.
Yes, he was really good. Yes, very fun.
Anyway, thank you very much indeed for your talk.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Just a few points before we go for our feast. Work is going on in the background to organise our meal out and also to organise our visits in May and June, and hopefully we'll have something to report to you on them in our January meeting, which will have